For deeper understanding on this subject, it's important to define exactly what abortion is. According to Merriam-Webster, the textbook definition of abortion is the termination of pregnancy after, accompanied by, resulting in, or followed closely by the death of the embryo or fetus. Most abortions in the United States are for unplanned pregnancies, most of which stem from unsuccessful or failed birth control practices. And also, there are varying reasons as to why abortions are done, and also there are different types as well. And they can either be intentional, which we're going to focus on for the majority of this video, or unintentional. It's also vital to understand the Church's position on abortion. The Catholic Church takes a firm pro-life stance on this issue. It believes that life begins at conception, meaning the embryo. Because of this, the Church opposes abortion because it works in opposition to human dignity. This comes from the idea that we are all created in the image and likeness of God. When a baby is killed, in the eyes of Catholics, it takes away that person's right to life. This theme is echoed in the three readings below. All of this can be traced to the fifth commandment, which urges Christians that they shall not kill. However, the Church looks at cases of double jeopardy separately from intentional abortion cases. Double jeopardy is when the death of a child is ethically permissible if they are treating the mother's sickness and not directly attempting to kill the child. For example, in cases of hypertension.
While we're on the subject of abortion, it's important to address the social implications behind this issue. And one of the biggest ones is for the reasoning behind women having abortions are the economics behind it. There was a research project done titled The Disparities in Abortion Rates, and it finds that with respect to income, 64% of pregnancies among women with an income of less than 100% the federal poverty level were unintended. This shows that for low-income families, this is not intended. They're not prepared to have a child when they're given this issue. And this also is important to note because in lower-income areas, it's clear that there aren't many childcare opportunities for these families, which means that if both parents have jobs, it's near impossible to take care of the child because there's nowhere to help take care of the child while they're at work. It's also important to note the divisiveness of this issue. There was a Gallup poll that surveyed 1,000 people, and 46% were pro-choice, 48% were pro-life, and 6% were neutral. And obviously, this divisiveness of the issue causes a lot of tribalized nature amongst each side, whether that be just on a fundamental level or taking the Church's stance, which is cited from John Paul II as saying, life, in fact, is the fundamental condition, the initial stage, and an integral part of the entire unified process of human existence. So when you take that side, it becomes really heated on both issues because they feel like it's fundamental to their belief systems. And lastly, it's also difficult for a change in lifestyle. There was a Guttmacher Institute in New York found that the largest reason for abortions came from parents not being prepared to have a child, which is really important because they're not trying to commit a moral injustice inherently. They're more don't want their children to grow up in a home where they're not prepared to raise their child. And they mean the good for their child, but they're just not prepared to raise one right now. After what we've learned from abortion and the stance from the Catholic Church, it's clear that this is a really divisive issue. And obviously, there's different sides to this. Obviously, we can only listen to the Church, but we also have to acknowledge that there are justifications for why women do this. And really what it boils down to is there's a deeper, more impactful message behind abortion, and that's acknowledging women's rights and trying to pursue human dignity for women. And I feel that both secular and on a religious level, both institutions are based on trying to preserve that dignity. Possible solutions to both maintain this and better understand the Church's position to someone else is portraying the family culture in a different light. It's easy to assume that family life is simply settling down, and for a young girl or boy, that's kind of intimidating because you've been living a life of independence for so long, you're not prepared for it, especially when it happens unintentionally. And an important way to help fix this issue is by listening to what the church says. So in Gaudium et Spes, it quotes, "Children are really the supreme gift of marriage and contribute very substantially to the welfare of their parents. The God himself who said, 'It is not good for man to be alone.'" And also there's a quote from the text Human Viati, which says, "But to experience the gift of married love while respecting laws of conception is to acknowledge that one is not the master of the sources of life, but rather the minister of the design and established by the creators." And it's important that we show this message that children are our future, and it's important that we maintain this and we don't just cease the existence of a child simply because a parent is not prepared. And by creating this culture, we have to create an environment where women are able to talk out loud about these really stressful situations they're put in. And if we create a culture that tries to endorse a life of creating a legacy through a mother's children, I feel it would help implement a pro-life stance more easily.
Psalm 139, 13-16. You formed my inmost being. You knit me in my mother's womb. My days were shaped before one came to be. In the passage, the sentence, you, as in God, knit me in my mother's womb, acknowledges that God is present in humanity even before birth. He is one with humanity even in the womb. Because of this, there is an understanding that removing that life is equivalent to removing God before one came to be, and is thus an evil act. Do you not know that you are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy that person, for the temple of God, which you are, is holy. This passage recognizes the sanctity of life, that the Spirit of God dwells in us, and extinguishing that life is like destroying God's temple itself. Thus, we are called to protect that holiness of God's temple and the God's Spirit here on earth. The issue of abortion comes up multiple times in the seamless garment. Overall, the seamless garment disapproves of subjugating the sanctity of life in favor of utilitarian uses. For example, it says, the good of the unborn baby is subjugated to economics and the child is killed in order to spare the parent economic hardship. However, abortion is only one of the many subjects under the Catholic social teaching umbrella, and it would be wrong to believe, quote, as though opposition to abortion takes away the sins of the world. Depending on state, U.S. women can potentially face an array of restrictions regarding abortion in the modern world. For instance, in Alabama, the Human Life Protection Act was passed, which nearly completely restricts abortions, and any doctor who performs one could face from 10 to 99 years in prison. Furthermore, even abortions in response to incest or rape were illegalized. This Human Life Protection Act famously came into conflict with the landmark Roe v. Wade bill, in which the Supreme Court ruled that the Constitution of the United States protects a pregnant woman's liberty to choose to have an abortion without excessive government restriction. Because of this contravening of a Supreme Court ruling, the law's implementation has been delayed. This leads us to our discussion of modern-day stories. Even if it may be right in the eyes of some Christians, bills like the Human Life Protection Act are certainly not without controversy. For instance, young women like Sam Blakely, who are struggling with student loan debt and feel that giving birth to the child of the man who raped her would be a death sentence, are great examples of how anti-abortion protests can sometimes not acknowledge the whole situation. As we conclude our presentation, here are some discussion questions to consider. First, what other factors come into play in the graph above? If the fetus has a right to life, does that right take priority over the mother's right to control her own body? And lastly, when, if ever, does a human fetus become a human being?